The whispers in the walls. There was an old house at the edge of town. It stood on a hill, shrouded by thick trees that seemed to grow closer with each passing year. The locals whispered about the place, though no one had dared to go near it for decades. Its paint was chipped, the roof sagging, and vines curled around the windows like gnarled fingers, but the worst part was always the silence. The house had once belonged to the Harrow family, a wealthy but reclusive group. They had lived in that house for generations, until one by one, they had vanished without a trace. No one knew exactly when it happened, but the house had been abandoned for over 50 years. Megan had always been drawn to that house, even though she knew the rumors. She was a curious soul, and when she and her friends decided to explore the abandoned property, she felt both a rush of excitement and a twinge of dread. They made plans to go on a Saturday afternoon, after school. The day was chilly, with gray clouds hanging low in the sky. Megan couldn't shake the feeling that the air was thick, almost as if the world around them was holding its breath. When they arrived at the house, they immediately noticed how quiet it was. The usual sounds of birds and wind were absent. The trees stood still, and the only noise came from their footsteps crunching on the dead leaves. Megan felt a shiver run down her spine, but she didn't say anything. They approached the front door, which was slightly ajar, as though it had been waiting for them. They pushed the door open, and the hinges squealed in protest. Inside, the air was stale, heavy with dust. Sunlight barely filtered through the grimy windows, casting a sickly yellow glow on the decaying furniture. It felt like stepping into a place that time had forgotten. The wallpaper was peeling, revealing faded floral patterns that seemed to have been left to rot. "Let's go upstairs," Megan suggested, her voice barely above a whisper. Her friends hesitated but followed her up the grand staircase. The steps creaked under their weight, and every sound felt magnified in the oppressive silence. At the top of the stairs, they reached a hallway lined with doors to different rooms, each one closed tightly. The floorboards groaned beneath them, and Megan thought she heard a faint whisper, like someone calling her name. "Did you hear that?" she asked, her eyes wide. Her friends shrugged, uneasy but dismissive. "It's just the house settling," one of them said. But Megan couldn't shake the sensation of being watched. They entered the first room on the left. It was a bedroom, though everything inside was covered in dust and decay. An old, four-poster bed stood against the wall, its canopy shredded and torn. The air in the room felt oppressive, as if the weight of the past had settled here. But it wasn't the room that made Megan uneasy, it was the faint whispers. Soft at first, like a distant conversation just out of reach, but as they moved further into the room, they grew louder. "Did you hear that?" Megan asked again, more urgently. Her friends looked around nervously, but they didn't hear anything. She walked closer to the wall, feeling an odd pull toward it. Her hand brushed against the peeling wallpaper, and suddenly, the whispering stopped. The silence was deafening. Megan felt her heart race as she turned to face her friends. "We should go," she said, her voice trembling. But as they turned to leave, the door slammed shut behind them with a deafening crash. The sound reverberated through the house, and the temperature in the room dropped dramatically. Megan could see her breath, thick and visible in the cold air. The whispers returned, louder this time, and they were no longer distant. They seemed to be coming from the walls themselves. "Megan! Megan!" Her name was being whispered from every corner of the room, but it didn't sound like anyone she knew. The voices were wrong, distorted, as if they were being squeezed through a long, narrow tube. "Let us out," one of her friends screamed, banging on the door, but it didn't budge. Megan's pulse quickened. She backed away from the walls, but the whispers grew louder, more frantic. Something in the shadows near the bed shifted, and her heart skipped a beat. For a moment, she thought she saw something move, a figure, barely a silhouette, hovering in the corner of the room. "Leave this place," the voice hissed, its tone cruel and guttural. "It is ours." Megan grabbed her friends by the arms and yanked them toward the door. But the moment her hand touched the handle, she felt a cold, clammy hand wrap around her wrist. She screamed and twisted away, but the grip only tightened. The figure emerged from the shadows then, a tall, gaunt figure with hollow eyes, its face contorted in a grotesque smile. It seemed to be formed from the shadows themselves, its body shifting and flowing like smoke. It reached toward them, its hand outstretched, and Megan could hear the whispers again, louder now, all around them. "Leave, before it's too late." With all her strength, Megan threw open the door and pulled her friends into the hallway. They ran, stumbling over their feet, down the stairs and out of the house. As they made their way to the front door, Megan risked a glance back. Through the dusty windows, she saw the figure standing at the top of the staircase, watching them with empty eyes. They never spoke about what happened that day, but Megan couldn't forget the whispers. They followed her home, lingering in the corners of her mind. That night, she lay in bed, trying to shake the feeling of something cold brushing against her skin. But it was no use. Every night since, the whispers returned, coming from the walls of her house, growing louder, more desperate. And sometimes, in the dead of night, when the wind howls just right, she swears she hears someone whispering her name, beckoning her back to the house on the hill. Hope you enjoyed the story.